Oh yeah!
When I was a child, I had zero interest in televised wrestling. I was the type of kid to point at the TV screen and yelp about how fake it looked. Even throughout school, I was often annoyed by people who talked about it. Obviously, I didn't want to judge them for their interests, but I guess I didn't understand why they would argue that it wasn't staged.
He's using hypnosis! Is that legal here?
When it clearly was. However, while I may have not been interested in the glorified professional wrestling, or the sport itself, I was a huge fan of the games. And if there's one wrestling game to rule them all, it is surely WCW NWO Revenge. Now, this game came out at a time where all the mechanics in wrestling games weren't worked out yet, but that's what made it so perfect. You couldn't continuously just beat on your opponent like in newer wrestling games, and this clunkiness and invincibility frames are what made it so awesome. We held many grand matches on this title, but the culmination of greatness could only take place at one arena: the Starcade. For those of you unfamiliar with the Starcade, or simply born after the year 2000, it was essentially an annual professional wrestling event that started back in the early 80s. It was a flagship for pro wrestling where some of the biggest fights took place, none of which I can name. However, the most important matches in my book weren't taking place for the world to see. Instead, they were simply just between my brothers and I. Now, we typically play by some interesting rules. Pretty much, the only way to win was to either knock out your opponent or simply have them tap out in pain. Now obviously, this gave certain characters an advantage, who had more power moves than pinning ones. But ultimately, for some reason, we were against the idea of pinning someone. So you just wailed on your opponent until they gave up. Now, we had several of our own story arcs going on within the game since you could rename and change the outfit of any wrestler. Each of these fights would take place at different rings throughout the game as random henchmen would come and try to stop you prior to fighting the real adversary in the Starcade. And the king of the villains was Dr. Frank. Now, while Dr. Frank may have not been a real wrestler, he was definitely one of the most interesting ones in the game. We often flocked towards characters that had unique costumes, and my younger brother mainly played as Dr. Frank and Ming Chi. Dr. Frank was a formidable foe due to his resilience, but also because a lot of his attacks leached your spirit energy. For those unfamiliar, your spirit gauges become filled when you are doing good, and falls when you are losing. The crowd energizes the fighters in the ring, and your spirit gauge is your greatest ally in prolonged fights. It's honestly the ticket between standing up to fight again and losing your will to compete altogether. In our fights, when your character is so destroyed from fighting, it is literally the only thing keeping him standing up. The Starcade was the culmination of the battles we waged along the way, and when you stepped into that arena, you finally knew you were in for the fight that actually mattered. Most of the time upon defeating wrestlers, my brother would heckle us by saying that the character you defeated was only a henchman sent by whatever fighter was behind it all. It was like a classic superhero saves the day, but never actually defeats the villain for good type of scenario. The Starcade was where our longest adventures ended and new ones began. In my eyes, it featured one of the coolest songs in the game, and it really pumped you up for the fight ahead. It was epic in nature, and really brought out the best of us as players. Many prestigious fighters met their end in this arena, and there are plenty of times our matches will last an hour or longer due to each player pushing the game's mechanics to the limit. Lots of laughs were had, and lots of my friends would grow angry out of pure frustration, as the game seemed like it was in our favor. Because of all of this, the Starcade will always trigger fond memories for me, and it will always be one of my pixel portals. But now that I've taken that championship belt from you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with wrestling games. Even if you weren't a fan of wrestling, did you enjoy playing the games regardless? Who was your favorite wrestler? And WCW NWO Revenge is the best wrestling game out there. Well, that was actually more of a true statement and not actually a question. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to click on that small little gear icon next to my name too. That way, you'll never miss any of my videos. And with that, thanks for joining in ringside for a wrestling adventure. If you'd like to join us on our YouTube voyage and help us obtain our heavyweight belt, then the subscribe button is just what you're looking for. Thanks for watching, guys and gals, and until our next video, cheers. You've made it to the end of the video, but wait, your quest isn't over yet. If you're looking for more nostalgic content, you can always check out my video on the things I learned while playing RuneScape. Even if you didn't play the game, I feel it'll still probably resonate with you through your own experiences. On the flip side, perhaps you'd like to check out my last pixel portal on Aqualist from Kirby Superstar. I'll be sure to tackle more places in the future, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoy.